nuclear energy, and the opera. They might not have a lot in common at first glance, but here's how I see it. Opera is seen as stuffy. Nuclear energy conferences, also seen as stuffy. The opera has a long dramatic history of trials and triumphs and tribulations. Nuclear energy also has a long and dramatic history of trials and triumphs and tribulations. So at closer inspection, they're not all that different. On today's episode of Naked Nuclear, we're checking in with Eric Meyer of Generation Atomic to find out how he weaved together this symphony between nuclear energy and community collective action.
So my piece of this is like, hey, I'm going to sing opera music and I'll rewrite lyrics to the Toreador song from Carmen. And we were able to hand out almost 5,000 books.
And today we're digging into how he went from singing opera on the streets of France to keeping power plants open in Illinois.
It looked like 4 nuclear plants were going to shut down. And that was like 40% of Illinois' clean electricity. We sent over 1,000 fax messages to the governor's chief negotiator.
So without further ado, we bring you a nuclear opera in 3 acts. Act 1, the early beginning.
As a kid, I was a big fan of The Simpsons. And I think because of that, I had taken as fact that nuclear energy is far too dangerous and too dirty to be pursued. So at that point in my life, I was probably vacillating between being a filmmaker. We used to do little ninja movies, messing around with a camcorder, a rock star, playing a little bit in a band, or professional video game player. I wish I could say at age 10, I had the kind of global awareness that I do now, but it took a few more years to get there. I always had a love of math, science, and engineering, but hadn't really studied it seriously since high school, taking physics, making potato guns, trebuchets, and kites. Love that stuff. But, and in high school, I didn't have anybody saying, hey, you're really good at physics and math and science. Maybe engineering. It was like, hey, you're the only person who's won both the vocalist and instrumentalist of the year award in the history of our school. You should be a musician. I think some of that is like medium fish in a small pond. You get some accolades and you start to form your identity around that. I think I really started being more aware of the challenges in decarbonizing. Just a few years later, I remember a few conversations with my dad, driving around. We were doing roofing mainly for businesses. My dad's business do commercial flat roofing, and we go by a lot of windmills, very big in Southwest Minnesota, go by a lot of signs speaking to the benefits of corn for ethanol production. I remember having conversations like how, wouldn't it be amazing if we could get all of our energy from the wind and from corn? It would be pretty amazing. I think, high school, college, you start to see the limitations of that strategy, start to realize, hey, actually, ethanol has not been great in terms of land conservation, in terms of food prices. It's had a lot of negative side effects, and the wind doesn't always blow. So you start to realize these things, realizing that nuclear energy was this really, really powerful technology in terms of providing reliable, clean energy, yet it's so misunderstood. I realized maybe I should try to do something about this. Yeah. And it was about that time in college, a friend of mine sent me a video about a type of advanced reactor called the molten salt reactor that can recycle nuclear waste, that can run on nuclear weapons, like was meltdown proof. Like all of the concerns I had about nuclear energy were completely absolved by this one advanced reactor. Of course, the actual reality is a little more nuanced than that, but that TED Talk video he sent me got me to take another look at the technology, writ large. It was the Kirk Sorensen about liquid fluoride thorium reactors at the time. It's kind of funny because a lot of people that are active in the advocacy space and who ended up going to study nuclear engineering in college will cite some of his videos, which are made by this Canadian stay-at-home dad / IT guy. It just shows like the power that individuals can have. By putting out those videos, he shaped the lives of a lot of people. Between that and experiencing a 500-year flood, losing my car, put all that together and get a music major, changing directions in life and going to eventually start a nonprofit.
In Act 1, we saw our hero Eric go from camcording ninja filmmaker to wannabe rock star to opera star, and noticing a trend within nuclear energy, decides to start a nonprofit after experiencing a 500-year flood. So now we'll bring you Act 2, the nonprofit.
The seed for it really started in grad school. Got a degree in applied public policy and learned how to run a nonprofit and file all the taxes, and then learn kind of some of the movement building skills and communications and messaging skills that you need to do that kind of stuff. My first international advocacy came about at the climate talks in Paris in 2015, where I was there handing out these books. I still have a couple copies of them, called Climate Gamble. Is Anti-Nuclear Environmentalism Endangering Our Future, I think is the subtitle. So my piece of this is like, hey, I'm going to sing opera music and I'll rewrite lyrics to the Toreador song from Carmen, especially if you're like a random French person. I definitely did catch some attention, and we were able to hand out almost 5,000 books during that week or so that we were doing that, me and a couple of Finnish authors. But yeah, singing, you can only do so much, like singing opera about nuclear and books to strangers. Not exactly like a winning political strategy.
So Eric starts a nonprofit, but how did he build a team? How did he source people together? Where did they live? What were they doing? And how did he organize so many people around a singular cause?
Oh, yeah. Well, the first year of Gen A, it seems like a completely different lifetime. I had a co-founder who was no longer with the organization a year later. He's still doing good work in nuclear. It just, not all the partnerships always work out. But yeah, that first year was crazy. We were living in Ohio, breaking fire codes, I'm sure, in this 2-bedroom duplex. We had like eight people living in for a little while, going out canvassing all day long, making videos, holding events in support of saving some nuclear plants in Ohio. It was wild stuff that first year. It was a good crash course and a realization that door-to-door campaigning is, one, very expensive, logistically complicated, a little bit questionable as far as the efficacy. We did drum up about 9,000 postcards worth of advocacy from individuals at their doors, sending it to petitions and stuff. So maybe move the needle a little bit, but wow, what a lot of work. And I learned a little bit in campaigns I'd worked in college. I managed a couple local campaigns, a county commissioner campaign. So I did know how to do all that stuff. After that first year, we transitioned sort of into a new era where we focus more on recruiting and training volunteers, making really persuasive and memorable online content, memes, short videos, articles, things like that. Inspiring people to look more into nuclear, and then empowering those people to make a difference in their communities when it comes to this technology. And that's been a more sustainable and rewarding model, kind of leaning on volunteers more than like, let's hire a bunch of random people. Since then, we've had a solid team for the last 3 years. Anytime I find somebody who shares this passion and has some skills, self-starting is at the top of that list. We're remote, so it's super important, and I'm not going to micromanage anybody. But yeah, it ended up being one of our long-term volunteers. Philip Holt is our development coordinator. My brother, I convinced him to sell his CrossFit gym and come work with us and coach people on being volunteers instead of getting bigger biceps. Had some talented folks from all around the country working with us to make videos. Kirsten makes a lot of our social media videos. Mary manages our social media stuff. And then we got Jeff and Madison doing policy coordination, and then a couple international policy fellows, Vlad and Gayatri, doing good work surrounding the climate talks. So yeah, it's been awesome. I love the team that we have now, and they've been doing amazing work.
Every good opera has a source of drama. For the United States, it's usually partisan drama, the politics and the policy making that can tear households apart. So is that the same with nuclear energy? Does nuclear energy cause the same amount of partisan drama?
It is the most bipartisan climate policy that we have. The timing for that couldn't be better. When you talk about President Biden's landmark pieces of legislation have been amazing for nuclear. The first one is the bipartisan infrastructure law, which had the civil nuclear credit in it, used to fund extending the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant in California, which is 1/8 of the clean electricity there. It also funded the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Project. So we have the Bill Gates Natrium project getting funding from that, as well as X Energy making their high temperature gas reactor. So really kind of jump-starting an industry that has been in cryo sleep. I mean, we haven't really built a nuclear plant for almost 40 years in this country. So we kind of forgot how to do it, don't have the supply chain. And the way these types of projects are funded in the West is you need like private investor, private capital to do this kind of stuff. And nobody's willing to put up billions of dollars for like a decade to try to do this. The government really needed to step in. The bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, awesome as well, providing tax incentives to build nuclear plants and produce hydrogen with them. The CHIPS Act had some provisions in it called the Vision for the Future, which puts extra incentives for placing nuclear in frontline communities and places like in environmental justice issues, going back to brownfields from either chemical plants, fossil fuels, stuff like that. Yeah. And then the most recently, NECA, Nuclear Energy Innovation Capabilities Act, NEMA, things that have helped modernize the regulatory structure. And then most recently, the ADVANCE Act, further funding and securing our supply of fuel so we don't have to rely on Russia for a percentage of the nuclear fuel we get here. I think the Biden administration has been the most pro-nuclear administration in the last like 50 years. I mean, maybe go back to Nixon when he was talking about like having 1,000 reactors by the year 2000. They talked a big talk back then, but yeah, it's been great on a federal level. State level, it's improving. A few nuclear moratoriums have come down, like Kentucky, West Virginia in the last couple of years, Montana. Illinois got rid of their ban on nuclear for reactors 300 megawatts and less. It's better than nothing, but why so prescriptive about it? You know, the only reactor we have experience building right now is a big one. We still have over 10 states that have some type of ban building new nuclear, including my home state of Minnesota. That's our big policy focus right now.
If partisan squabbling isn't the reason these reactors have been banned, then what is it? Historical fears, Chernobyl, Fukushima, a hair-trigger reaction to closing down a nuclear plant when a large-profile accident takes place?
I think a lot of lawmakers saw what happened with Germany when they shut down their reactors. They have delayed their decarbonization by at least a decade. Coal's hopefully going to come down finally in the 2030s, but they've taken more nuclear off their grid than the amount of coal they had. So if they would have taken the coal off instead, they'd already be close to 100% clean. But they prioritized getting rid of nuclear first, and that was a huge mistake. Meanwhile, you have France next door producing about 70% of their electricity from nuclear. Sweden as well, about half. Both of those countries decarbonized their entire electricity grids in the 70s and 80s. The places that have shut down their nuclear plants have really struggled to keep the lights on without burning a ton of fossil fuels. The word's getting out in part due to advocacy efforts of lots and lots of people.
And a typical day in the life of the Generation Atomic founder?
Yeah, I'm like just looking around my desk and there's like 6 different types of stickers and a stack of 200 business cards. There's a lot of plate spinning for sure. So a typical day, like a lot of people, is emails and there's meetings. You know, a lot of that is building to one of the atypical days where you're at the Twin Cities Pride Festival handing out close to 4,000 bananas in a weekend and having well over 3,000 conversations with people about nuclear energy. And it's got pages and pages of signups. And so hopefully all of the meetings and emails are building towards real impact in the world. I shouldn't throw too much shade at meetings because sometimes the meetings are with elected officials and those are important. I always try to ask myself, is this a meeting that could be an email? What are we really doing here? Let's make sure everybody knows that within the first 5 minutes. You do get those little dopamine rushes when you have a really successful advocacy event where you thought you really got to talk to a lot of people. But of course, all of that is just rungs in the ladder to actually changing the law. That will be the big win in Minnesota when we get that. We're pushing for that in 2025 to legalize nuclear here. The big wins over the last few years that come to mind are 2022 passed a piece of legislation. This is before the Inflation Reduction Act, which kind of changed everything. If this piece of legislation in late 2021 in Illinois didn't pass, it looked like 4 nuclear plants were going to shut down. And that was like 40% of Illinois' clean electricity. It was a lot. And we met with members of the energy committees. We organized letter writing. We sent over 1,000 fax messages to the governor's chief negotiator. And then on the day the state Senate passed the bill, the last person to testify was one of our star volunteers, Alyssa Hayes, and she crushed it. She's from Illinois and from a community that used to have a power plant. They shut it down in the 90s. She had been growing up her entire life seeing the ramifications of that, losing that business, losing all those tax dollars, what it did to the schools, everything. It was just rough. So she could really speak to it from a personal level. And right after they voted and passed the law, that was awesome. The other one was getting Diablo Canyon extended. We can't take all the credit for this. I think a good chunk actually goes to blackouts that were happening in California. If you're a governor, he saw the value of that. We organized a coalition of agricultural organizations to write letters to the legislature in support of that, saying hey, if we keep Diablo, we have the chance to also use it for desalination because they're facing horrible droughts. California needs water. And MIT, Stanford had just released this awesome report showing hey, this is what Diablo could do in terms of desal. Those are kind of the big ones. Recent ones are the banana thing. And then we had a 2 million view video a month and a half ago, which is cool. It was about nuclear waste. It was 20 seconds long and there's a lot of glue involved. It's trying to make slime. And sometimes, the weirdest videos gets people interested in the topic. That's what we're trying to do. And then they can kind of climb the ladder of engagement.
Act 3, the future of nuclear.
Well, I hope that Generation Atomic is no longer necessary. That would be good to have enough success that the value of nuclear energy is more universally known. If that happens, then we will have achieved our vision of atomic energy being broadly used for the benefit of people on the planet. To get there, we got to make reactors like we make airplanes, one a day coming off the assembly line, being shipped to where it is needed and plugged in, or built in shipyards and sent on boats. We can't get to where we need to be with artisanal stick-built nuclear plants with, 5,000 people working on site for 6 years. That's tough. You can get good at that and definitely make it work. Japan was able to finish a large nuclear plant, first of a kind, in under 4 years, one of their advanced boiling water reactors. And I feel like we really need to make nuclear power into more of a product rather than a huge construction project. So, get to that assembly line reactor. I think 50 years should be plenty to do that. Hopefully we can do it in 20 or 10 would be ideal. So breakthroughs, innovations in how reactors are made, and also how that technology is used, not just for electricity, but for district heating systems. Instead of having all the little power plants, furnaces in people's houses and sending the fuel like natural gas like we currently do, why not have a central power plant and send the hot water and have that heat homes? I mean, they do that in a lot of places already in Europe. There's a Finnish company called Steady Energy that's working on district heating. really simple nuclear plants that don't produce electricity. Just your cheap carbon neutral fuels. We're not going to be flying planes with batteries. We're not going to be shipping things across the ocean with batteries. So it really comes down to sustainable carbon neutral fuels. We know the chemistry. We've done things on a small scale. We don't have the reliable, large amount of energy and clean energy to do this yet. And nuclear would definitely be able to provide that. So yeah, fuels, chemicals, fertilizer, cement. And then if you have more reactors on the world, you have more opportunities to produce medical isotopes as well. So bring the cost of cancer treatment and all those diagnostic procedures we do with medical isotopes down quite a bit by just flooding the market. Waste and safety, right? Nuclear waste, people think it is the worst kind of waste. It's actually the best kind of waste. Very easily contained. We have overly engineered containers to contain it. There's not a lot of it. You can't say that about the waste stream of very many things out there. I'd love to be able to recycle it at some point, but I understand that the economics of that have to be improved. In the early days of recycling, the question is, how can we make this cheap? Safety is another thing where we already have among the safest of energy sources. And even in the worst case accidents, we're looking at deaths in the low hundreds. Like nobody died at Fukushima. Chernobyl looks like it's going to be around 200, maybe all said and done, but it's way less than they initially thought. And the UN, World Health Organization, have had to revise their numbers because they're like, wow, actually, not that many people died. Yeah, that was a reactor with no containment and in an illegal test in the middle of the night with all the safety systems disabled, literally every possible thing. They didn't tell anybody to take iodine tablets. They didn't throw out the contaminated milk. They did everything wrong. It's hard to imagine anything ever approaching that again. And we just don't have reactors like that without containment running in the world today. We're like, oh, I bet we can make people feel safe by engineering the perfect reactor. It's meltdown proof. We actually had the experimental breeder reactor number 2 in Idaho, which is pretty substantial for an experimental reactor. It's 60 megawatts, it could power a town of 60,000 roughly. Just 2 weeks before Chernobyl happened, they did a meltdown proof test. They showed that they could disable all of the cooling systems and just hands off the controls, and the reactor would shut itself down with physics alone, no engineered system or anything like that. But nobody ever hears about that one. So the odds, 2 weeks before the worst nuclear disaster. I think those questions, we could only do so much engineering to address the waste and safety issues. And I think we've kind of done it all already. So I think those need to be addressed with more social engineering, talking to folks, education. We'd like to put things on the human scale whenever we can. So we have a couple charts that show how much raw material does it take to generate electricity for this number of people for a year. And we try to pick a number of people where the quantity of stuff is something you could visualize in front of you. It's on your website. How much raw material is required to make clean energy? How many kilograms per megawatt hour? And it's a megawatt hour. That's enough to support the electricity use of about 1,300 people for an hour. For an hour of hydro, you need about 16 kilograms. For wind, 12 kilograms. Solar is about 7 kilograms of nuclear. So this is all of the stuff that goes into a nuclear power plant. 5 kilograms or 11 pounds. It's something you can imagine holding in your hand. A pellet of uranium is the same as a ton of coal in terms of energy value. If you get your entire lifetime supply of electricity from nuclear power, the waste product would fit in a can, which is actually what this says on this can koozie I'm holding. It's really important to give people examples they can wrap their heads around. The reason we were handing out bananas at the Pride Festival was trying to human scale radiation a little bit. Okay. Because it turns out, bananas famous, of course, for what nutrient? It turns out a small fraction of all the potassium in the world, including that in the banana, is a radioactive version called potassium-40. And eating a single banana as a result of this we'll dose you with more radiation than living next door to a nuclear plant for a year. And that really, that was a good hook, get the foot in the door. And at that point, it's like, did you know we have nuclear? And we say, you have a guess what the largest source of low carbon electricity in our state might be? And so many people were like, bananas? No. Get your blood sugar up and try again. People didn't know. It's nuclear power in Minnesota, in North America, in Europe, largest source of low carbon generation still, despite having not really built it for decades.
This has been a nuclear opera in 3 acts. And now, our final curtain. What is your personal philosophy in 5 words?
Oh man, make future you say thanks.
When you're not advocating for nuclear energy, what activities and hobbies are you typically getting up to?
There's definitely some Dungeons and Dragons happening up in here. I run a game for my nieces and nephews, and there's often energy themes. This dragon is being enslaved to power the heat of this town, but if they take it away, the town will freeze. I like trying to work in some environmental themes there. I plays in a couple of D&D groups as well. Mountain biking, board games, video games, lots of fun. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that like 90% of my personality is connected to nuclear energy.
So, and another question. You've got 4 minutes to prepare a TED Talk on a completely different subject. What are you going to talk about?
Probably learning through play. I'm a big believer in this. We've developed a tag game that elementary kids could play to learn about different energy sources and intermittency and things like that. There's also this card game that we've been the North American distributor for called Megawatt, where kids or whoever, adults can play too, are tasked to build an electricity grid and then put it to the test against natural disasters and, cyber attacks, all kinds of event cards that are pulled from the news, and upgrade your grid and then compete to try to have the most power and the least environmental impact. I'm a big believer in learning through like self-directed activities and play like that.
And last question would be your top 3 favorite songs to sing?
Number 1 is easy. It's The Impossible Dream from Man of La Mancha.
Great one. It's like my mom's favorite.
It just resonates, right? Because it's about devoting your life to an important cause. Even if there's like no guarantee of success, even if it seems hopeless, just the attempt in itself is a noble endeavor and worth it. And I like to change. So the original lyrics are very much about I, me, first person, and I like to change it to be we instead and make it inclusive. If I want to flex the vocal cords a little bit, I'll sing something from Handel's Messiah, like, why do the nations so furiously rage together? Or, you got this really complicated melismas with fast triplets and fireworks. Or if I want to have a good emotional sing, I might do some Brahms, like the 4 serial songs, get the acting going, tap back into that art song, opera past. I'm sure everybody will know those. So look up Brahms right now.
I think because my mom was a ballerina, I just thought it was like normal to listen to an absurd amount of opera growing up.
You do notice though that there are a few opera ditties that are just in a bunch of commercials. They're like, oh, that's Puccini, that's from Skiki. Yeah, or Carmen, which the opera itself, not great. The story doesn't really hold up. Music's amazing. That's probably like 80% of opera though.
So I'm gonna recapping, because you said you built Generation Atomic mainly off of volunteers. How does somebody get involved and become an atomic ambassador, and how do you like jump right in?
Yeah, you can literally go on the website and click get involved, and that will send you an email and you get to set up a one-on-one with us and get onboarded into one of our different volunteer groups, of which we have 3 big ones, and then we have some state-based groups, but the big ones are the government team, the tech research team, and the education, communication, outreach, or ECO team. And they meet either weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the team. The Atomic Ambassadors is nice because it teaches you a lot about the technology, but also about how to talk to people in ways that are persuasive, friendly, and memorable, and how to address the concerns people have about nuclear, which is understandable. People do have concerns. There's history there. No energy source is perfect. How to talk through that. The ambassador training gives a toolkit of different things you can do in your community to build up your local network and make progress in your area. That's a really good one to get involved with. After doing it for 3 years with GAIN through the Idaho National Lab, the Gateway to Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear, we've really honed the training really well. So it's super good now.
And what Eric would like to hear on future episodes?
I'd like to hear a discussion, maybe a debate between different strategies of dealing with nuclear waste, because there's a few different schools of thought within the nuclear advocacy community on this. Some of these areas of disagreement and tension are really interesting to me, because there's good points to be made all around, and there's advantages, different strategies from economics, from messaging perspective. Also, just as a communicator, I'd love to hear other communicators and their experiences and ideas. I think we're a pretty good follow. We have a lot of awesome videos and things, so you shan't be disappointed. And you can get to them all from our website, generationatomic.org, or just searching anything. Everybody who's listening to this knows how to use the internet, so I won't explain it.
Thank you again for listening to A Nuclear Opera in 3 parts with Eric Meyer from Generation Atomic. If you'd like to get involved with Generation Atomic, you can go to generationatomic.org and search Atomic Ambassador. And thanks again to Eric for accepting the invitation to come on this podcast and the amazing work that he's doing in the nuclear advocacy space. Don't forget to check out the Afterpop, a brief explanation of policies in this episode with Eric Meyer. Again, I'm your host, Danielle Allen, and you've been listening to Naked Nuclear.